How can I say that? The economy is a bitch. I know that's not the right opening, but I think that's what's going on right now. Every day, something is happening with the economy that surprises us. And yesterday was a big, big, big surprise because the stock exchange rallied big time upon the news that was given by the government. So what happened exactly? The Dow Jones surged at 3.92%. The Standard and Poor rallied 5.8%, which is the biggest jump in 2 years. And the Nasdaq surged a whopping 8.05%, which is the biggest jump in 2 years. So why? That's because the government yesterday released an information that the inflation went down from 7.9% to 7.7%, and there was a 0.4% increase month to month. So it looks like 7.7 from 7.9 is not a big thing, but it was probably a very big thing for investors. Before I talk a little bit more about inflation, I wanted to give you the definition of the inflation, the real definition, right? So the inflation happens when a currency loses its value and doesn't have the same purchasing power as before. So that's the definition. So that might not be what you know about inflation. Maybe you know inflation as a price increase in the product. That's the result, right? That's not the cause. That's not the definition. Most people think that inflation is a price increase. Actually, it's not a price increase. It's a drop in purchasing power, which at the end is the same. And that's why economy is so complicated. But trust me. So why do we have inflation? Well, actually, a couple of days ago, I was watching Larry Kudlow on Fox News, and he said that inflation was caused by the stimulus package that was given by the government. Actually, yes, the stimulus package was given by Trump mainly, and then by Biden. So it's not like, this government has created inflation because the stimulus package was given before this government was into power. And he said that's the only cause of the inflation. Of course, that's the only cause, right? And he said that to fix that, we need to reduce the tax and increase our oil production in the United States. Huh? Okay. Let's backtrack a little bit. So he said that inflation is caused by the stimulus package, too much money in the system. Okay, so how do we fix that? We produce more oil. Hmm. I think I've heard somewhere that if you're not part of the problem, you're not part of the solution, right? So cutting tax and increasing the oil production in the US doesn't sound like it's a good fix for the inflation, right? And actually, it's not, because the inflation is not entirely caused by the stimulus package. There's another economist in the name of Steve Hanke that said that inflation is caused by the increase of money supply, which is about the same as the stimulus package, right? It's just other words. He's using other words, which is true. Yes, because that's how inflation is starting. Too much money chasing too few goods. But that increase in the money supply, it's just a catalyst. That's what started the whole mess, but that's not it. Remember that we had a stimulus package because in the US and everywhere in the world, there was COVID for a couple of years, and most people couldn't work for several months, some of them for several years, and there was no production, right? So if there was no production, there was no work, and if there was no work, there was no money. So the government in all the world decided to subsidize their constituent and give them money to avoid some kind of revolution, right? So it was the right thing to do at the time. Definitely. Yes. But as I said, nobody was working, and especially in China, where the Chinese government decided to shut down the entire country for much more longer than the rest of the world and the United States. So when the United States started again to go to work, the Chinese people and China as a country were not yet started to stop their production or increase their production. And remember that most of the products that we consume in the United States are coming from China. So if China is not producing the goods we are consuming, that's a problem because there's an imbalance And the law of supply and demand is working. If there's a lot of demand but no supply, then obviously the prices are going to go up. That's logic. Even products that we are producing in the United States, like for example, we are producing a lot of electronics and especially cars, and all those electronics need chips to work. And so far, and even as of today, right, the US doesn't produce chips. They're all produced abroad, and especially in Taiwan and in China. So if Asia was not producing because of COVID, there was no chips produced. So even though the US was back to work, we couldn't finish what we were starting because we didn't have the raw materials. And few raw material means that the law of supply and demand will also work here. Not enough product produce a price increase, supply and demand. Remember that there was also a breakdown of the logistic chain supply. So right after COVID, the price of a container from China to the United States reached $23,000. And the regular price is around $1,200 to $1,500. So there was more than 10 times increase in the price of shipping the product. So of course, this will affect the price of the product we are consuming in the United States. So it's not because there was too much money in the United States, it's because the price of the product coming from China were much more expensive. There was also a reopening of the wage parity, the rise of international price of agricultural products, the rise of raw materials, because they were not produced abroad, right? The rise in wages. As a reminder, about 2 years ago, the minimum wage in Los Angeles was $9.50 an hour. And right after COVID, if you go now and look for a job, the minimum hourly wage would be around $16 to $17. It's not a minimum. It's the price that the company are willing to pay for an entry position because they cannot find worker. So they have to pay more to be able to find the people they need to produce what they're producing, right? There's a big imbalance and the shortage of workers. And actually, this leads us to something called the NAIRU, non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment. So this is an economic principle that has been around for maybe 50, 60 years, something like that. And it says something like this, right? When there's less unemployment, there is much more inflation. That's an economic principle. So if you don't know what the NAIRU is, just go and Google. It's called NAIRU, NAIRU. But that's not all. That's not all. In February, we had a big problem because Russia decided to invade Ukraine. So the war started. There was a rise in energy prices, and especially the price of oil went from $60 a barrel right after COVID to $150, $160 a couple of months after after Russia invaded Ukraine. So all of this make that inflation is gonna continue on the long run. But that's not all. There's also a rise of the dollar as a currency compared to other currency. Right now, the dollar is very strong, much stronger than a couple of years ago, and it's a problem for our inflation. There's also a financial dollarization of the economy worldwide. So you see, there's a lot of reasons why there's inflation. There's multi-cause inflation. There's not only one problem that caused inflation. There's multiple problems, but that's not all. Someone called Ray Dalio, which is very well-known economist. If you don't know Ray Dalio, go to Google and Google or YouTube his name, and he has done a lot of videos. He's very well-known. So he said that inflation is caused by electoral uncertainty and the U.S. internal conflict between the right and the left, and especially extreme people in the right and extreme people in the left. And he says that as long as we cannot talk together, that's still going to be a problem. So we need to do something at the political level. But that's not it. There's also another cause of inflation that nobody's talking about, and that's the cost of climate change. And according to Ray Dalio, the cost of that climate change is worth $10 trillion. It's a cost, right? It's not free. A cost is never free. Someone has to pay for it. We paid for it already. We paid for it in the form of taxes. We paid for it in a form of lost productivity. And we paid for it in the form of the government's paying the cost for us. And then they send us the check or the bill, right? So why is it that there's a cost of climate change? Well, first of all, there's a lot of disasters because of climate change. A lot of fire, a lot of flooding, loss of habitat, weather shortages, which is coming because of the drought, crop damages because of the disaster, sea level rises. There's also a cost because of the weather. The summers are hotter than before, so we have to use more AC. More AC means more energy. More energy means that we're going to consume more coal and oil. The winters are colder, so we're going to use more gas to heat our homes. But that's not all. There's also a cost of climate change on our health because of the carbon dioxide. Because of the pollution, more people are sick. There's malnutrition. There's less productivity. And when there's less productivity, we produce less product. And like I say, supply and demand. Less product, price increase. So in a nutshell, we have a $10 trillion debt because of the cost of the climate change. And every year, according to the IMF, the cost of not fixing the climate change is $500 billion. So on the one hand, we have $10 trillion cost already that we have to pay. And every year that we're not doing anything to fight climate change, it costs us $500 billion every year, right? So we need to do something. And that's why there's a bunch of guys in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt right now, as of today, right? And they are talking about that, about climate change. That's the number one concern in the world. What are we going to do to fight climate change? And of course, all those guys, they don't agree. They say, yes, there's a problem. They all agree that there's a problem, but nobody is agreeing on the solution. And when they agree on the solution, everybody comes back home and they don't implement the solution in their own country. So it's like, guys, what are we doing? Right? So as you can see, inflation is not just one thing. It's a lot of things. It's caused by a lot of different things. And as long as we don't do anything about all those problems, inflation is going to stay. So it's up to us to work, to talk between us, and try to find a solution for this problem. That's it. I'm gone, and I see you on the next video. Bye-bye.